Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange, and today I'm here to bring you a top 10 list of my favorite indie horror published books. And for this list, I'm going to restrict it to just one entry per author in order to just celebrate and highlight as many authors as possible. I will admit that I probably read more traditionally published horror these days, but I definitely do have my indie favorites. And while I'm usually really strict when it comes to these top 10 rankings, these are a little bit more of a loose ranking, and so on a different day, I probably would put some of these books in a different order, but just know that if they're on this list, it's because I like and recommend them, and just don't take the rankings too seriously here. But I know if you're like me, there's something just really nice about an ordered top 10 list, so I did decide to attempt to put them in some kind of a ranking. Otherwise, I have some great books to talk about, some great recommendations, and I will of course have links to the entries on Goodreads down below in the description box so you can check them out for yourself. All that being said, let's get started. First, at number 10, we have Sorrow's Point by Daniel Devoe, and this is a story that follows an ex-priest who is contacted by an old friend who wants him to look at his daughter because she is quite ill and he believes that she might be possessed. He agrees to go look at her and brings along his witchy friend in order to determine if the girl is possessed, and if so, if she's in need of an exorcism. This story is one that definitely appealed to me because if you don't know, I'm a huge fan of possession stories, so the premise definitely hooked me in, and the story ended up really delivering. So this story I like because while of course it involves a priest, it also has that witchy element to it. So the take on the possession and possible exorcism just is not as traditional as I come to see in so many books that just always follow the priest going in and doing the traditional Catholic rites. And so I like that this one was a little bit different. I was pleasantly surprised how dark it got. The child is legitimately creepy, and I just really enjoyed the fact that this book got pretty dark and disturbing and grim. So if you're looking for a new possession story, one that in my opinion is a lot more underhyped than a lot of the classics that you normally hear talked about all the time online, this is a great place to jump into in terms of indie horror. Then at number 9, we have Come Little Children by Dee Melhoff, and this follows a woman who is working in a funeral home in the northern region. She is going to work at this crematorium to continue her learning into the practice, and so she goes and works and lives with this family who have this family business. She ends up getting involved with one of the children, adult children of course, and they form a relationship. But while she is there, strange things start to happen, and one day she opens the door and finds a strange child who appears to be quite injured and possibly is being sewn up. And so they start to realize that there is something perhaps more supernatural going on, and there are secrets within the family, and slowly things are revealed to this outsider. This book is a bit off kilter, it's a little bit weird, and the narrative is just strange. But if you like creepy children's stories, if you like stories involving morticians and their work, this one might really appeal to you. I definitely enjoy those body horror elements. And again, this is one that in my opinion is so underhyped and really should get a lot more love. So highly recommend it. Again, links down below if you do want to check out any of these for yourself. Then at number 8, we have Witch Hunter by J.Z. Foster, and this follows a man who likes to do almost a form of cosplay. He has a group where he pretends to be a witch hunter. One day he is followed along by a journalist who is just investigating or doing a piece on these supposed hunters. Of course, little do they know that they actually may have come across a real witch, and in so doing so have to deal with it. This is much lighter than a lot of the other horror books I'm putting on this list, so I would say that it's more satirical horror, which often does not work for me, but in this case it totally hit home. I really enjoyed the main character. He was really funny, and I enjoyed the fact that he was playing the role of a witch hunter, and then of course, as you know from where the story is going, you know that he's going to get into more than he can handle and have to improvise. And yeah, this one was a lot of fun. The witch itself I thought was actually quite well done, and there's more in the series if you like the first book. So it is one I recommend for those of you that love witchy horror, because it's really hard to find horror that actually involves witches, because most witch stories are more urban fantasy or urban romance in a lot of cases. So this is one that I think is just a lot of fun, really entertaining, and again, one that in my opinion is a bit of a hidden gem. Then at number 7, we have Tattered Demon by Steve Verdon. And this story, at the beginning, you have the setup where in the 1600s, this small town buried a witch, and of course, things never stay buried. So flashing to the current day, we follow a strong, feisty woman named Maddie who goes about killing her husband and then has to go and bury him in that same field. By doing so, she accidentally awakens that spirit, and so she is haunted by this demon force that just will not go away. This book, I need to give warnings, is incredibly dark, huge content warnings. It is disturbing and messed up and vulgar, and I really loved it, if I'm honest. So this is one that I would recommend to those of you that are looking for horror that has a little bit more bite to it, that doesn't really play it safe, but something that is going to be really intense and creepy. And this one was also a lot of fun. There's some great banter between the demon and the young woman, who, again, I really like her as a main character. She is tough and speaks her mind and is just the kind of woman I love to read about. So this one is not going to be for everyone, but again, if that sounds up your alley, if you're looking for something a little bit more intense and disturbing, this is definitely my pick. That is a great thing about indie horror, is that it's a really great way to explore some of the more fringe aspects of horror, because often the traditionally published pieces just play it really safe, especially the newer stuff. So I like a book that goes a little bit further, but not too far, and just delivers a really scary story. Then at number 6, we have Camp Carnage by Joshua Winning and Elliot Arthur Cross. This story takes place at a summer camp, but not just any summer camp, but particularly one where boys are sent to pray away their gay behavior. Of course, this book is super tongue-in-cheek, and I believe at least one of the authors themselves is queer. So in terms of gay representation, this book is fantastic because it really throws up a middle finger at these kind of camps and institutions that try to change people's natural preferences. Essentially, the story follows this group of boys who, unsurprisingly, when you put a whole bunch of gay boys together, start to have some romance and flings, and all of that ensues. However, there is a killer on the loose and is going about taking them down, and the story goes from there. I love a good slasher story, and I like the fact that this one kind of brings in that queer, different aspect to the story and just has some really good commentary. But the story moves along at a great pace. It's quite short, and it's just a really enjoyable one. So I highly recommend this one to anyone who is looking for a fun slasher story. Great to read during the summer, or honestly any time of year. So if you haven't yet, definitely recommend picking this one up. So we're into the top 5, and at this point these are all favorites, not just indie favorites, but favorites of horror in general. So highly recommend all of these. At the number 5 position, we have Kill River by Cameron Rubik, and this is a slasher that follows a young girl living in the 1980s. Her family sends her off to a summer camp in order to make friends. She's reluctant to do so, but eventually she goes there, and yes, she makes some friends. They decide to sneak off from the camp and go to an abandoned water park. At first, it's all fun and games. However, people start to disappear, and slowly you begin to wonder or worry if there is a slasher on the loose taking them down one by one. And oh my goodness, this is a love letter to classic slasher films, and you can definitely tell the author's inspiration and love of the genre. He does his own cover art, so I really just want to highlight that here because I love his covers. And again, I made a rule that I was only allowed to put one book per author on this list, but if I hadn't made that rule, Cameron Rubik probably would have showed up a few more times. This is the first book in a trilogy, and then he has other spin-offs, and for the most part his work really again are inspired by slasher and other classic retro films. And so this one was just a lot of fun. I enjoyed the story. It was fast-paced and just includes a lot of fun nostalgic references. So if that sounds up your alley, if you're looking for something just lighthearted and entertaining, this is a great one to pick up. If you are just a lover of horror films, this is another reason to pick up this one. Obviously, highly recommend it. It's on the list. Then at number 4, we have The Nightmare Room by Chris Sorensen, the first book in the Messy Man trilogy. And this is a story that follows a couple that are headed back to the father's hometown. They end up renting this old abandoned farmhouse, and he sets up his audio studio in the basement because he records audiobooks just like the author of this book, which is really cool. They are mourning the loss of their son, and so the story is very much about family and grief. And of course, the house that they moved into might possibly be haunted or not. And so the story goes from there to some very disturbing places. This is a book I almost passed on when I got the opportunity to review it because, again, for those of you that follow my channel closely, you've heard me say again and again, I don't really like haunted house stories. But the author was so kind as to give this book a try on me, and it worked so well. This is probably one of the first haunted house stories I ever liked, and so it definitely holds a special place in my heart. I think the reason this book works so well for me is the fact that, again, it's much more about the family than the house, and oh my goodness, it hit me in the emotions. I loved it, and it had an ending that I thought was incredible. I just had a jaw-dropping moment when I saw where the story ended up, and I loved it. So highly recommend, again, beginning of series, so if you like it, there is always more. Then at number 3, we have 14 by Peter Clines, and this is a piece of sci-fi horror, but it's horror enough that I'm putting it on the list. This follows a young man who has to move to a new place. He finds out about this apartment building that seems too good to be true. The rent is quite low and the space is fantastic, and so he moves in, starts to meet the neighbors, and starts to realize that something strange is going on. There are strange bugs in the building, the rooms themselves are not the same size, and he starts to investigate. I do need to emphasize the fact that this book is definitely heavy on the science fiction side, which is probably part of the reason I love it so much, but I like it also because it is a very alternative haunted house story, which again is not something I normally like until I do, because I like when authors take a really original spin on it. And this book was a lot of fun. It has some great humor, some great characters, and again, it takes the tropes of a haunted house story. It sounds very traditional, and then it goes in a completely different direction, and I personally really like that direction. A lot of the author's other work are more science fiction based, but they always have little elements of horror, so if you like the two genres blended together, as you know I do, this one is a fantastic one to pick up. So much fun, highly recommended. I would recommend the audiobook version if you're a fan, because it's done by Ray Porter, who I personally love, and yeah, just love this one a lot, so definitely earns another spot on the list. Then at number 2, we have Camp Slaughter by Sergio Gomez. This is a story that is told over a few different perspectives, one being a group of young college-age kids that go off to party in the woods. It also follows a journalist who is investigating what is happening in the woods because people are possibly disappearing, and then we also get the perspective, which is probably my favorite perspective, of the cannibals that also happen to live in these woods. So you see how these stories and plot lines might intertwine. This book has one of the most terrifying prologues. I describe it as nightmare fuel, and the rest of the book definitely does not hold back. This author is not afraid to write some scary scenes, some fantastic kills, and it was just so much fun. If again you're a fan of slasher fiction, of cannibal fiction, things like that, this is definitely one you want to check out. Not for everyone. Again, if you're a bit of a scaredy cat, if you don't like scary books, might need to skip it, but I know for a lot of you, you read a lot of horror like me, and it takes a special book to actually get you scared. So if you haven't read this one yet, I obviously recommend it, and yeah, definitely one of the best horror books I've read, indie or traditional. Otherwise, it is just plain a good book, so I really encourage you to try it for yourself. And finally, earning the number 1 spot on this list today, we have The Forgotten Island by David Sodergren, and this story follows 2 sisters that go off to party in Thailand with some boys. They go off and again, they party, they drink, all that fun stuff. However, there's something more going on in this island, and it turns into a story of survival. I love this story for so many reasons. For me, it's just the iconic horror story. It hits on so many of the tropes, but in a way that never felt tired. It felt fresh and fun, and I think this is a great entry point for people that are newer to horror, or just simply the kind of horror book that I can pretty much safely put in almost anyone's hands. It's fun and entertaining, but it's not overly scary or disturbing in a way that makes me have to give a lot of content warnings for it, which I appreciate. And I just feel like it has a lot of wide appeal. So it's one that I wish I saw more people picking up, because I really do think that almost everyone is going to love it. I certainly did. And at the moment, like I said, I'm putting this in my number 1 spot because it's a book that I want to hand to everyone watching this and say, go check it out. It's a lot of fun, and I hope you love it as much as I did. So that's it for this video. I would love to hear of the books I talked about. Are you planning on checking out any for yourself? I'd also love to hear your recommendations for your favorite horror indie novels. And I should mention, for the sake of this video, I did try to restrict it to novels only, because when I was compiling this, I realized that a lot of my favorites are actually novellas, which seems very common in terms terms of indie horror to put out shorter fiction in terms of either short stories or novellas, but I really wanted to concentrate on novels here to make this kind of an interesting list. And I would love to know if you enjoyed this enough. Should I do a part 2? I could wait until I have at least another 8 to 10 books to talk about and do a second video here with more recommendations, so let me know if you enjoyed this. So if you want to help me out, you can share this video around online, you can give me a thumbs up, you can drop a comment, even if it's just a little emoji, that always helps. If you're new to my channel, consider subscribing. I do read a lot of horror, thrillers, science fiction, and fantasy. And otherwise, I will talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.